Oil spill, wetlands cleanup may be impossible. Removing the oil could leave a toxic stew, lethal to wildlife, fish, or any other thing. For many years, the gooey oil washing into the maze of marshes along the Gulf Coast could prove impossible to remove, leaving a toxic stew, lethal to fish and wildlife. Government officials and independent scientists say. Officials were considering some drastic and risky solutions. Theoretically, they could set the wetlands on fire or flood areas in hopes of floating out the oil. But they warn an aggressive cleanup could ruin the marshes and do more harm than good. So, the only viable option for many impacted areas is to do nothing and let nature break down the spill. Yes, it could take many years or decades or generations. More than 50 miles of Louisiana's delicate shoreline already has been soiled by the massive oil slick unleashed after BP's Deepwater Horizon burned and sank last month. Officials fear oil eventually could invade wetlands and beaches from Texas to Florida. Louisiana is expected to be hit hardest. They don't really know for sure. Oil in the marshes is the worst-case scenario, said Coast Guard Admiral Thad Allen, the head of the federal effort to contain and clean up the spill. So, in other words, oil in the marshes is the worst-case scenario, and yes, now it's coming true. Also on Saturday, BP told federal regulators its plans to stick with the main chemical dispersant it's been spraying in the open Gulf to break up oil before it reaches the surface. The Environmental Protection Agency had directed the company to look for less toxic alternatives. But BP said in a letter to the EPA that Corexit 9500, one of the chief agents used, remains the best option for subsea application. So, in other words, BP told the feds they're going to do whatever they want to do. Some kind of way, that doesn't sound too good. Oil that is rolled into shoreline wetlands coats the stalks and leaves of plants, the fabric that holds together an ecosystem that is essential to the region's fishing industry and a much-needed buffer against Gulf hurricanes. Soon, oil will smother those plants and choke off their supply of air and nutrients, killing them. And so then what happens when the Gulf hurricanes come? In very short order. In some eddies and protected inlets, the ochre red colored crude has pooled beneath the water's surface, forming clumps at least several inches deep. And with the seafloor still leaking or gushing, hundreds of thousands or perhaps millions of gallons of oil a day, the damage is only getting worse, rapidly or quickly. Millions and millions of gallons already have leaked so far. Coast Guard officials said on Saturday that the spill's impact now stretches across a 150-mile area or swath from Dauphin Island, Alabama to Grand Island, Louisiana. Over time, experts say weather and natural microbes will break down most of the oil. However, the crude will surely poison plants and wildlife in the months, yes, even years, decades, it will take for the syrupy muck to dissipate. Back in 1989, crews fighting the Exxon Valdez tanker spill, which unleashed nearly 11 million gallons of oil into Alaska's Prince William Sound, used pressure hoses and rakes to clean the shores. But the Gulf Coast is just too fragile for that. Those tactics could blast apart the peat-like soils that hold the marshes together. Hundreds of miles of bayous and man-made canals crisscross the coast's exterior, offering numerous entry points for the crude oil. Access is difficult and time-intensive, even in the best of circumstances. Just the compaction of humanity bringing equipment in, walking on them, will easily kill them, said David White, a wetlands ecologist. Marshes offer a vital line of defense against Gulf storms or hurricanes, blunting their fury before they hit populated areas. So, yes, that's what happens when the hurricanes come now. Louisiana and the federal government have spent hundreds and hundreds of millions rebuilding barriers that wiped out by hurricanes, notably Katrina in 2005. And they also act as nursery grounds for shrimp, crabs, oysters, all kinds of creatures. The backbone of the region's fishing industry. Hundreds of thousands of migratory birds nest in the wetlands' inner reaches. To keep oil from pushing deep into Louisiana's marshes, Governor Bobby Jindal and officials from several coastal parishes want permission to erect a $350 million network of sand berms linking the state's barrier islands and headlands. Yes, that might be a very good idea. But that plan is awaiting approval from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. If large volumes of oil make it through passes, the cleanup will become far more complicated or difficult as oil spreads into the canals. Smaller spills have been occurring in the marshes for decades. In the past, cleanup crews would sometimes slice out oiled vegetation and take it to a landfill. But this disaster or catastrophe is much bigger than all that. Many experts, though, warn when you're just going to light a fire, it becomes much trickier. If the marsh is too wet, the oil won't burn. Too dry, the roots burn, and the marshes can be ruined. Anyway, representatives from BP PLC, which leased the sunken rig and is responsible for the cleanup, said Saturday that cleanup crews have started more direct cleanup methods. Shallow water skimmers were attempting to remove the oil from the top of the marshes, or at least some of the marshes. But anyway, again, these are more signs. Yes, this is a very big one. Very big. Revelation chapter 8, verse 8. And the second angel sounded, and as it were a great mountain, burning with fire, was cast into the sea. And the third part of the sea became like blood. 9. And the third part of the creatures which were in the sea and had life died. And the third part of the ships were destroyed. And there are many signs happening daily all around the world. And there are many signs.